August 18, 1944. The Allied armies surged eastward across the wrecked fields of France, their tanks roaring, engines devouring fuel faster than any planner imagined. General George S. Patton's Third Army had broken through the German lines like lightning, but now, only weeks after D-Day, its advance began to choke on its own momentum. Thousands of armored vehicles stood silent along dusty French roads, their barrels pointing east toward an enemy they could no longer reach. For every gallon burned in combat, 3 were trapped behind shattered bridges, cratered highways, and burned-out depots. Victory suddenly teetered on the edge of paralysis. At the heart of this logistical crisis were the trucks, the true arteries of war, struggling to deliver millions of gallons of fuel, food, and ammunition across 400 miles of destroyed countryside. Convoys faced bombed bridges, strafing runs from desperate Luftwaffe fighters, and endless columns of refugees clogging the same narrow lanes. By late August, supply losses exceeded 20%, threatening to halt the Allied push entirely. Eisenhower's headquarters called for solutions, but no amount of planning seemed capable of overcoming France's broken infrastructure. It was then, amid the chaos, that an unlikely figure emerged from the ranks of ordinary soldiers. Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski, a former Pittsburgh steelworker turned army truck driver. Assigned to a fuel convoy unit outside of ranches, Kowalski spent endless nights repairing trucks, mapping alternate routes, and studying traffic jams like a man possessed. His comrades mocked his obsession, calling his ideas ridiculous, but his intuition told him that the problem wasn't fuel, it was flow. The convoys were fighting themselves, trapped in gridlock born of outdated procedures and rigid command structures. Kowalski proposed something radical. Instead of dispersed, uncoordinated shipments, he envisioned a single, continuous convoy system, trucks running around the clock on dedicated roads, in one direction only, like arteries pumping lifeblood to the front. His plan was reckless by military standards, yet simple enough to work. When the brass reluctantly approved a test run, no one expected it to succeed. Within days, hundreds of vehicles rolled under crimson flags marked Red Ball Express, roaring across France in perfect rhythm. For the first time since Normandy, Patton's tanks began to move again, and the tide of war shifted once more. By late August 1944, the Allied command authorized full deployment of Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski's experimental convoy method, though few officers believed it would last beyond a week. The name Red Ball Express came from American railroad slang, meaning high-priority freight that must never stop. Painted red circles on signs marked the new roads across France, exclusive lanes running from the beaches of Normandy to the front lines near Chartres and beyond. Every sign warned, Red Ball Route, authorized vehicles only. For the first time in the European theater, logistics moved as one unstoppable current. The plan relied on absolute coordination. Military engineers cleared debris, rebuilt bridges, and divided the network into one-way arteries, eastbound for loaded trucks, westbound for empties returning to the depots. Convoys rolled 24 hours a day, guided by dimmed headlights and hand signals under blackout conditions. Each truck carried a single driver and an assistant, armed with carbines to deter ambushes. Road discipline became sacred law. No stops, no delays, no overtaking. Every truck was part of a synchronized chain that could not be broken. Kowalski's convoy method shocked the military establishment with its speed and simplicity. By concentrating movement instead of dispersing it, he reduced confusion, fuel waste, and loss to enemy air raids. If one truck broke down, it was pushed aside immediately. Recovery crews followed to tow it clear. Mechanics established roadside stations every 20 miles, operating day and night to repair engines, replace tires, and keep traffic flowing. At peak performance, one truck left Normandy every 15 seconds, carrying ammunition, gasoline, food, and spare parts. Over 75% of the Red Ball Express drivers were African-American soldiers from the Transportation Corps, men whose contributions had often gone unnoticed. Their discipline and endurance transformed Kowalski's vision into reality. They drove through rain, mud, and sniper fire, often sleeping beside their engines or steering with bandaged hands. The Red Ball became more than logistics. It was a lifeline, a symbol of unity forged in exhaustion and danger. In less than a week, supply delivery rates doubled, then tripled. Eisenhower's staff declared the system the most vital artery of the European campaign. Against every prediction, Kowalski's ridiculous idea had become the heartbeat of liberation. The Red Ball Express thundered through northern France like a metallic river, relentless and unyielding, cutting across landscapes still smoldering from retreating German forces. Dust rose behind every truck, mixing with the smoke of burning villages, forming a ghostly haze that hung over the convoy lanes. Drivers wore goggles and scarves, their faces caked with grime, yet their spirits remained unbroken. Each night, the rumble of engines became the soundtrack of liberation, echoing across fields where tanks once stood silent. Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski's system demanded precision bordering on obsession. Convoys had to move in exact intervals, each truck maintaining a 40-yard distance no matter the terrain. If a vehicle stalled, its driver waved the next one ahead, ensuring the chain never stopped. Improvised checkpoints used lanterns and flags to relay coded instructions, red for caution, white for go, and black for danger ahead. The slightest hesitation could cause a collision, a fire, or worse, draw the attention of enemy aircraft. German Luftwaffe fighters occasionally strafed the roads, turning supply lines into killing grounds. Drivers learned to abandon their trucks and take cover within seconds, then return to their seats before the dust settled. Many convoys moved under constant threat of snipers hiding among trees, forcing men to drive with rifles wedged beside their seats. Still, the cargo had to move. Fuel for Patton's tanks, rations for soldiers, ammunition for artillery. Every gallon delivered meant another mile toward Germany, another step toward ending the war. Fatigue became an invisible enemy. Men drove 16-hour shifts, surviving on canned rations, black coffee, and nicotine. They joked grimly that sleep was for civilians, not Red Bull drivers. Some fell asleep at the wheel and woke only when their trucks veered off-road. Despite exhaustion, morale remained astonishingly high. Letters home described pride rather than complaint, a quiet understanding that their wheels kept armies alive. By September, convoys stretched over 600 miles of improvised highways, carrying 12,000 tons daily. The Red Ball Express had become an unstoppable organism, fueled by sweat, discipline, and faith in an idea born from one trucker's courage. Through mud, fire, and exhaustion, they drove history forward 1 mile at a time. Within the command posts of liberated France, the Red Ball Express stirred admiration and unease in equal measure, a logistical miracle born outside official doctrine. Army quartermasters, bound by decades of rigid procedures, viewed Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski's methods as reckless improvisation, a disruption to the sacred order of military transport hierarchy. Reports described his convoys as undisciplined lightning, too fast, too chaotic, too dependent on individual instinct. Yet behind their skepticism lay a deeper truth. His system worked when theirs had failed. Kowalski, a Pittsburgh trucker turned soldier, understood engines and men better than bureaucracy ever could. He spoke not in ranks but in rotations, not in regulations, but results. His rolling chain theory eliminated downtime entirely, creating a living rhythm of motion that defied conventional planning. Commanders demanded strict manifests, but Kowalski countered with fluid delivery cycles, using feedback from drivers instead of clerks. Where paperwork once delayed supply lines by hours, his method cut the process to minutes, transforming chaos into controlled speed. The brass remained unconvinced. Some officers accused him of endangering cargo by refusing armed escorts or abandoning disabled vehicles, calling his approach a trucker's gamble. But frontline soldiers disagreed. To them, those reckless trucks were salvation, bringing fuel, food, and hope through fire-scorched roads no standard convoy dared to cross. When Patton's tanks roared back to life near Verdun, even Eisenhower's logistics staff began to reconsider the unorthodox driver who had outsmarted attrition itself. By October 1944, Official orders reluctantly adopted aspects of Kowalski's model, formalizing his continuous flow supply route under structured command supervision. Yet he remained wary of bureaucratic control, warning that too much interference would smother the very efficiency they admired. His words proved prophetic. As generals reimposed strict protocols, delivery times faltered again, and road congestion returned. In response, field commanders quietly allowed Kowalski's original drivers to operate independently, an underground revival of the true Red Ball spirit. The conflict between innovation and authority had become a war within a war, fought not with bullets, but with orders, reports, and exhausted men behind steering wheels. Through it all, the trucks kept rolling, and history tilted quietly toward victory. The highways of liberated France became arteries of flame and dust, pulsing with the relentless motion of the Red Ball Express. Day and night, under artillery thunder and strafing aircraft, the convoys moved like steel veins feeding a living giant. German Luftwaffe remnants prowled the skies, hunting the unarmored trucks that carried the fuel of victory. Drivers learned to read the hum of engines and the echo of approaching danger, their survival measured in seconds and reflexes. The roads themselves were enemies. Potholes carved by shellfire shattered suspensions, while bridges collapsed under the weight of overloaded convoys. Rain turned fields into bogs, and dust storms blinded drivers until they followed only the dim glow of taillights. Yet every truck kept rolling, guided not by maps but instinct. Engineers repaired bridges overnight, while drivers fashioned makeshift tires from scavenged rubber and wire. What official planners called temporary measures became daily acts of defiance. Enemy resistance grew ruthless. German rearguards mined intersections and ambushed convoys with hidden machine guns. Kowalski's drivers responded with speed rather than firepower, accelerating straight through danger before the traps could close. It was a doctrine of motion: never stop, never cluster, never give the enemy a fixed target. Their courage turned logistical necessity into tactical innovation, rewriting battlefield survival through sheer momentum. Exhaustion stalked every mile. Men slept upright behind steering wheels, surviving on coffee and canned rations. Some trucks drove for 70 hours without relief, guided by muscle memory more than consciousness. Mechanics carried spare parts in their laps, repairing engines under shell bursts, oil-slicked hands trembling but unyielding. The convoys never waited for sunrise or orders. They followed the pulse of the war itself. By late 1944, the roads of France shimmered under a ceaseless convoy glow visible from the sky. Each truck's headlights carved a line of defiance through chaos, a symbol of persistence amid destruction. The Red Ball Express became not merely a supply route, but a moving testament to endurance, courage, and engineering adapted through necessity. On those roads of fire, every delivery was an act of resistance, and every mile brought the Allies closer to liberation. The Red Ball Express was more than a convoy network. It was a living organism built from muscle, fuel, and faith. Nearly 75% of its drivers were African-American soldiers, men who served in segregated units, often denied combat roles, but entrusted with the war's most vital artery. They worked without recognition, operating under constant fire, mechanical strain, and racial prejudice, yet their precision turned chaos into rhythm. Each convoy became a testament to human synchronization under impossible odds. They called themselves the Rolling Thunder, an army within an army that moved to its own cadence of diesel and discipline. Orders were scarce, but teamwork was absolute. Drivers communicated through headlights and horn bursts, a Morse code of motion across burning countryside. When one truck failed, others stopped without question, fixing engines under flares or towing wrecks through mud. The line never broke because every man knew that behind him lay Patton's tanks and ahead waited victory. Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski earned respect not through rank, but endurance. His ridiculous method, dividing convoys into self-contained groups with rotating rest intervals, transformed fatigue into efficiency. Each segment operated like a mechanical gear, maintaining constant pressure on supply routes without burnout. Officers initially dismissed the plan as unmilitary, yet results silenced skepticism faster than orders could be rewritten. The method became doctrine, spreading through logistics commands across Europe within weeks. Tension persisted behind the discipline. Drivers endured exhaustion, racial slurs, and the weight of invisibility in official reports. Yet among themselves, barriers dissolved in shared danger. Black and white soldiers repaired the same engines, shared the same rations, and bled into the same soil. The convoy culture forged equality through necessity, an unspoken brotherhood that history too often overlooked. By the time the Allies reached the German border, the Red Ball Express had hauled over 400,000 tons of supplies. Its success rested not on machines or command orders, but on men who became one machine themselves. Their synchronization under pressure created a model for modern logistics and a quiet revolution in human cooperation. Beneath the roar of engines and the rattle of steel, the human machine endured, and history followed its rhythm forward. By September 1944, the Allied front stretched thin across northern France, its armored divisions outrunning their own lifelines. Fuel shortages threatened to halt the momentum of liberation, yet the Red Ball Express kept Patton's Third Army alive when every drop counted. Day and night, convoys thundered through shell-scarred valleys, hauling gasoline, ammunition, rations, and medical supplies at speeds that defied regulation. What had begun as an emergency improvisation was now the spine of the Allied offensive. German forces attempted to cripple these routes through strafing runs, ambushes, and sabotage. Bridges were destroyed, villages burned, and roads cratered beyond recognition, but nothing could break the flow. When Luftwaffe fighters appeared overhead, drivers accelerated instead of scattering, trusting the convoy's density to confuse enemy gunners. It was madness by military standards, yet it worked. German intelligence struggled to understand how thousands of trucks could move so fast across ruined terrain without collapsing into chaos. Kowalski's system of rotating convoys allowed a constant stream of motion toward the front, while maintenance teams operated like battlefield surgeons along the roadside. In some sectors, fuel deliveries outpaced consumption for the first time since Normandy. Generals credited improved supply lines for renewed operational tempo, enabling rapid breakthroughs toward Lorraine and the Saar region. Patton, famously impatient with logistics, finally admitted that the unsung truckers had done the impossible. Beyond strategy, the Red Ball Express reshaped the Allied command's understanding of mobility. Static warfare had ended. Armies that could move faster than they could think now defined victory. Kowalski's ridiculous idea had evolved into a logistical doctrine, continuous flow supply, that would become standard for NATO decades later. Commanders realized that wars were no longer won by firepower alone, but by the velocity of support sustaining it. As autumn rains turned roads into rivers of mud, the convoys pressed on. Soldiers drove blind through storms, trusting headlights like stars on darkened horizons. Every gallon of fuel delivered became a bullet fired at tyranny. Every ration box a step closer to liberation. In those nights of ceaseless movement, the Red Ball Express didn't just turn the tide of war, it defined how modern warfare would be fought forever. The Red Ball Express was born from necessity, but matured into something far greater, a living experiment in unity under fire. On the roads of France, the strict racial lines of the U.S. Army blurred beneath mud, oil, and exhaustion. Nearly 3/4 of all Red Ball drivers were African-American soldiers, men who had been denied frontline duty but carried the weight of the entire war on their shoulders. Their courage and endurance redefined what service meant when equality was still a dream whispered in barracks shadows. Kowalski's convoys became an unspoken challenge to the segregationist structure that governed the army. When engines roared and convoys rolled, there was no rank in the storm, only responsibility. White mechanics depended on black drivers, black loaders depended on white escorts, and together they formed a brotherhood stronger than regulation. It wasn't written in orders or speeches, it was forged in grease, danger, and the shared knowledge that without them, the front would starve. In countless letters home, drivers described nights where prejudice dissolved in the rhythm of the road. When German artillery struck a column near Chartres, Mixed crews fought side by side to rescue trapped comrades from burning trucks. When engines froze in the Ardennes, everyone pushed together, their boots sinking in frozen mud as officers watched in silence. The Red Ball Express didn't preach equality. It lived it, mile by mile, act by act. War has a way of revealing truths bureaucracy hides. Officers began to notice the discipline, intelligence, and leadership among drivers who had once been dismissed as unfit for command. Reports from logistics officers recommended promotions and commendations across racial lines, quiet revolutions that would echo long after victory parades. When the war ended, many of these men returned home to a divided nation, yet their shared experience on Europe's roads planted seeds for the civil rights struggles to come. The Red Ball Express was more than a supply chain. It was an engine of transformation. In the crucible of necessity, it proved that efficiency, courage, and equality were not separate virtues, but one unbreakable force. History would forget their names, but the road they built carried the world forward. By November 1944, the Red Ball Express had accomplished what no supply operation in history had ever achieved. Its trucks had carried over 400,000 tons of supplies across more than 800 miles of torn European terrain. Yet as Allied armies surged into Germany, the once roaring convoys began to fade from the roads. New rail lines, captured ports, and stabilized supply hubs made the emergency network obsolete. But to those who had lived its grind, the end came with a hollow echo of silence. Kowalski stood beside his truck near Verdun, watching the last convoy form under gray morning clouds. Engines coughed to life one final time, headlights cutting through mist that clung to the Meuse Valley. Drivers gathered around makeshift fires, trading worn gloves and stories instead of medals. For months they had existed in motion, their entire world reduced to fuel gauges, maps, and endless road. Now, with orders to disband, it felt as though an artery of history was closing. Commanders issued final reports praising the operation's efficiency, yet few acknowledged the human toll behind those statistics. Over 200 men had died in accidents, ambushes, and exhaustion-driven mishaps. Thousands more carried scars invisible to medals, fingers frostbitten from frozen steering wheels, ears deafened by roaring engines, nerves frayed from sleepless weeks. Still, none spoke of complaint. Every life risked had kept an army moving, and every mile conquered had carried the weight of freedom itself. As the convoy rolled for the last time, Kowalski climbed into the cab that had been his home for months. The rhythmic hum of tires over cobblestone felt strangely foreign now, a heartbeat preparing to rest. Villagers along the road waved as the trucks passed, their cheers fading into the November wind. For the men of the Red Ball Express, there were no parades, no speeches, only the sound of engines echoing through history one last time. When the line finally halted outside Metz, the drivers shut off their engines and sat in silence. What began as one man's ridiculous idea had carried the war to victory and changed the world's understanding of what human determination could build when speed meant survival. The war ended, but the hum of the Red Ball Express never truly stopped. Its lessons outlived the battlefields, echoing in every supply chain, every highway, and every convoy that followed. What began as desperation in 1944 became the foundation of global logistics, proving that innovation and courage could emerge from the unlikeliest places. From a truck driver's intuition, a mechanic's persistence, a soldier's belief that motion itself could be victory. The same principles that kept Patton's tanks moving would later guide humanitarian relief efforts, corporate supply networks, and modern military operations worldwide. Raymond Kowalski returned to Pittsburgh a quiet man, unaware that his ridiculous idea would one day be studied in military academies and business schools alike. He never sought recognition, yet the system he built reshaped how nations moved resources and how armies thought about time, efficiency, and endurance. His convoys had shown that innovation required neither rank nor laboratory, only the will to act when others hesitated. For men like him, the road was both battlefield and classroom, and every truck carried a lesson in perseverance. The African-American drivers who formed the lifeblood of the Express carried their legacy into another fight, the struggle for equality. Their discipline, skill, and sacrifice shattered stereotypes that had defined military service for generations. When civil rights leaders later spoke of dignity earned through service, it was men like those drivers, grease-streaked, sleepless, and steadfast, who embodied that truth. Their miles became silent protests against injustice, every delivery a declaration that worth was measured in contribution, not complexion. Across Europe, remnants of the old route still exist. Rusted fuel drums, tire scars hidden beneath grass, and fragments of steel signage buried in fields. Farmers still find them after rain, relics of a road that once carried an army and changed a world. For historians, engineers, and dreamers, the Red Ball Express remains a story of motion turned into meaning, where ordinary people did extraordinary things simply because they refused to stop. Long after the last truck engine fell silent, the rhythm endured, in highways that cross continents, in logistics that sustain nations, and in the belief that every journey forward begins with one impossible idea that refuses to yield.